Good morning. You guys hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Anybody have anything in the news while I give you guys credit?
There's the whole Pentagon situation where press aren't being allowed into the Pentagon anymore, and a lot of news companies are choosing not to sign um, that deal.
Is that you, Caleb?
Yeah,
Okay. Um, yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that, and I have a couple of things that I might add on as well.
yeah. I just really know the rough details of like they're just preventing access for reporters to the Pentagon, which provides but it just kind of it gives off bad vibes for um, what is and isn't going on there. Because if you're not allowing your reporters access to this point, like if you're worried about secrets being divulged from the news sources, like that hasn't really happened. Like all the stuff that we've covered in regards to people leaking information, it's all come from internal sources. Like no one's sitting in the Pentagon and listening through a doorway to get secret information. So whatever other reason you have for limiting access for reporters to the Pentagon, because I'm sure there's even secret parts of the Pentagon beforehand that reporters are not allowed in, which that's just common sense. But if you're going to restrict their access to the Pentagon almost entirely, it's just not good. And even as it seems like it's a conservative movement because the current administration is conservative, a lot of the conservative outlets are complaining and not moving along with it as well.
Right. I mean the Secretary of, I guess we call it now, Secretary of War is requiring any reporter to sign an agreement basically not to uh, receive or disclose secret information and unauthorized, information, which essentially makes them like as if they were PR people for the Pentagon. Most reputable reporters refuse to sign, and so they don't have official access to the Pentagon any longer. For example, the uh, the the reporter for NPR is one of those who um, I'm hesitating here because suddenly you guys disappeared from me. Okay, you're back. Um, so the NPR reporter refused. One of the persons who now though uh, it has a is a news organization that is authorized in the Pentagon is the Gateway Pundit. You have mentioned the Gateway Pundit from time to time. These are former St. Louis Republicans who were in the Tea Party movement, and they are the source. They have a huge profile online. They actually have more viewers than the St. Louis Post-Dispatch website. And they have had, their stories have been Barack Obama was born in another country. Um, January 6, 2020 was, um, uh, was just a patriotic protest. That election was stolen. They were the ones who first, or one of the first to report that two black poll workers in Atlanta had had been seen to be stuffing ballot boxes. That was disproven, and those two poll workers have collected big judgments from Rudy Giuliani, who passed along this false information that originated with the Gateway Pundit, and and also Fox News, and some other right-wing news outlets. At any rate, so this is who we now have as a Pentagon correspondent, um, instead of these sort of veteran correspondents who've been there for 20, 30 years, like the NPR correspondent. So it's not a good thing from my point of view. Um, I was actually never, I don't think, at the Pentagon for a press briefing, but I was actually I was in there's a pool of of the press that the Pentagon has, whom they call on sort of no warning basis if there's some sort of national security action afoot. Um, and I was on that. At any rate, that's an interesting story in the news. Anybody have any other comments about it?
I will say
Well,
it was interesting. There were several outlets calling out the previous Pentagon press corps, calling them like institutional journalism. I think one of the outlets was worked for InfoWars and was settling like a $1.5 billion lawsuit, something along those lines,
So
calling
that
people fake news.
so that is an organization what is being criticized as being a traditional organization, or because
So it was someone
they're
from
like the definition of false news.
yeah, it was basically like the false news or the InfoWars people calling the previous Pentagon press corps institutional journalism and fake
Oh,
news.
right, right.
Um, yeah.
I mean, InfoWars they're the ones who claimed that the school shooting in Connecticut was for a motion picture. They're about as far out there as one could imagine. Um, let's see, I'm still
Isn't
getting. Go ahead.
it is interesting that I mean, I don't know how much reach those 60 organizations have either. I follow a lot of Pentagon stuff, and it's not something that ever sh those organizations like I think it's like what was it like not the Washington Post, but they all have those names. They never show up for anything. So I'm really
Well, I mean, I suppose it's probably like a lot of other agencies that uh, I mean, I've never actually been in the Pentagon briefing press room, so I can't give you like a eyeball reading on that, like I can say the White House press room or the Justice Department press room or the Supreme Court press room, which were all places that I actually saw. But at most press areas, there's like about half a dozen or a dozen regulars who have offices in the press room, and who would be at every press conference. I mean, AP, Reuters, the wire services, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, etc. Um, LA Times, I suppose. And uh, But
like
then there's
Lindell
some others who
TV.
just, whenever
Yeah.
there's like, say, a military operation afoot, or an important Pentagon announcement's going to be made, they will come over from their newspaper offices to cover it. So they're not like regulars. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, so I found one of their statements. The Lindell TV My Pillow guy.
Oh
We
God.
join a coalition of more than 60 media outlets and independent journalism committed to transparency, truth, and accountability as as legacy media continues to lose trust of the American people. And I think that was like kind of like one of the top-down things they were saying. Human Events, yeah, joins the press corps. I'm not even sure who they are.
Well,
But that's basically
Human Events Human Events is a conservative magazine, uh, but it's been around for a long time. It's not one of these sort of new new organizations. Um, but so I wouldn't put it in the same category as InfoWars, for example. I mean, it's it's old enough that when I was involved in a controversial story as an editor of the Stanford Daily 50 years ago or more, let's see, 54 years ago, uh, that they criticized me by name in Human Events. So it's been around for a while, at least half a century. Um,
Oh
whereas
yeah.
InfoWars and Gateway Pundit, I mean, those are all things that sort of cropped up in oh, I don't know. I mean, this century, I think. Maybe InfoWars goes back to the 90s, but I sort of doubt it. Um,
Yeah, if
Gateway
you look
Pundit
at the,
was definitely 2010, thereabouts.
and I think they probably have like a different direction, but now they're all focusing on like the Pentagon, and there's all those, what, like 8 strikes in the Caribbean, and I don't think a single one of them's posted about it. I'm like
Yeah,
looking at the
which would
feeds
seem to be a
now.
pretty important Pentagon story that's that they would be writing about. Um, let's see, Ethan, I got to get you. What, who else am I missing? Richie, I think I got you. It's good
I did.
it's good when I forget as I'm doing this because then sometimes you'll get like extra credit. No, I did you already. I'm not going to give you extra credit. Okay. Noah, I
I
don't
did
have.
have.
Huh? I'm sorry.
Um, it's not a journalism related issue exactly, but I mean, in regards to that stuff in the Caribbean, I am kind of wondering if there was proper coverage of what the Department of War was doing right now. What would they really be saying? I guess. Like, I'm still thinking about that Venezuelan opposition leader winning the Peace Prize a few weeks ago. And she's pro Trump, and she also seems to be pro regime change too. And all of the press was extremely positive about this. So is anybody really willing to go against Trump, the Trump administration on this specific policy anyway? Because it doesn't seem like anybody really wants to push against that.
I think Rand Paul was calling them extrajudicial killings, right?
That's true. I mean, Rand Paul has been, who is the sort of libertarian Republican senator from Tennessee or Kentucky.
I'm not sure.
I think it's Kentucky. Uh, has been quite critical of President Trump, particularly on these, what he calls extrajudicial uh, killings, which of course they are. Um, I mean, the sort of legal rationale for them is that is that this is a national emergency and these are enemy combatants, and enemy combatants are fair game on the field of battle, which I guess we're considering the Caribbean to be for this war on drugs. Um, so that's the sort of like legal rationale. I mean, I think it's very thin, and there's lots of criticism of it as being against international law. But I mean, that's the kind of story that one would hope would come out of the Pentagon is here's what the Pentagon says, and here's what international law says, and here's what some legal experts say. Here's some who agree with it, and here's some who disagree with it. That's what one would hope would come out of the Pentagon. If the name of the Pentagon reporter who turned in his press card um, is escaping me. Maybe I'll try to find it here. But he is a perfect example of of a really a really good um, uh, Pentagon reporter who knows a lot, has been around covering the Pentagon and military operations for a long time, is right down the middle. Um, and let's see, Tom Bowman, that's it. Uh, he's been covering the Pentagon for decades. Um, I'll put this into the
Yeah.
chat. So, I think that this is when there are controversial actions that the government is taking, these are the times when there's the most need for there to be really good Pentagon coverage, and we're not necessarily getting it. Other comments about this?
I guess I would like to add that I believe, to add to the negative reporting, I think Jim or CBS reported that a lot of these boat traffickers are just fishermen, or several of them can be identified as fishermen, just paid large amounts of money and sent to a GPS location. And I think that coincides with the need for, like, if you look at like what Pete Hegseth puts out in the Department of War, they say our intelligence states these people are, but all of that's still classified. So are they fishermen, or what does the intelligence say that they're not releasing? Right? Because right now they're just releasing videos of them blowing up boats and saying our intelligence identifies them as narco terrorists.
Right, right. I mean, can you imagine being really being a fisherman out there and getting attacked from the air like that? That would be something.
Yeah. But I think that's the last thing I'd have to add. And I guess the government shut down, right?
And the government
And
shutdown.
the government shut down.
Yeah.
I will say one interesting thing, it's not making the news, is all of like the USDA and the VA today all sent out press releases blaming the Democrats for the shutdown. And I think I have a screenshot of the USDA one where they said, yeah, I've now voted 12 times to block programs. And I think Massachusetts had one too. Yeah, right down here, Senate Democrats, they continue to hold out for illegal aliens and gender mutilation procedures, or instead of reopening the government, it's like on the USDA website.
Read that again.
So Senate Democrats have now voted 12 times to not fund the food stamp program, also known as SNAP. Bottom line, the well has run dry. At this time, there will be no benefits issued November 1st. We are approaching an inflection point for Senate Democrats. They can continue to hold out for health care for illegal aliens and gender mutilation procedures, or reopen the government so mothers, babies, and the most vulnerable among us can receive nutritional assistance. And that's on like a bunch of government websites. And the VA released a statement today too, and he's all on Twitter. But if I get to my Gmail, but it's really interesting. And I think the Massachusetts thing, they released one too. What did the VA say? I'm pulling it up for my 17 email accounts.
So these are basically Trump administration
Yep.
talking points. And there are Democratic Party talking points. And you can evaluate which you think are strongest. I mean, the Democratic Party is saying we'll reopen the government if you extend the Obamacare subsidies, without which people are going to have huge increases in health insurance and end up with lots more uninsured people. And if you take back the Medicaid cuts in the big beautiful bill that you had promised not to make. That's the Democratic talking point.
Yep.
This Republican talking point about uh, female genital mutilation, etc. I, it seems a little bit out of. I mean, that's certainly an issue, but it seems like that talking point is a little bit out of left field. Um,
Yeah. I just find it interesting they're using government websites, like the actual USDA website and the actual SNAP website. Like both sides are using them now. So like
yeah.
blasting.
Well, I mean that is actually sort of a First Amendment issue. I mean, and they can do it. Well, let's put it this way. It's actually sort of a complicated issue to a certain extent. I mean, the government officials and the government has a First Amendment right to government-sponsored speech. Uh, where the only kind of like legal guardrail that they could, the legal problem they could run into is the Hatch Act. I mean, for example, Christy Nome, the head of Homeland Security, um, was was sending videos to all the airports saying basically the Democrats are causing, we're doing everything we can with this government shutdown that the Democrats are causing. And so, that sort of goes across, that sort of goes into a partisan political attack, which you're not supposed to use government funds for. And under the Hatch Act, Hatch was Orrin Hatch, uh, I think he's no longer alive, but I covered him for many years in the Senate Judiciary Committee, Republican from Utah. Very conservative, but also he was also a close friend of Ted Kennedy, so also willing to try to reach across lines on some issues. And the Hatch Act was, is, I believe, named after him or was sponsored by him actually, and dates back long before I was covering him. And and it says you can't use government funds or government money to make partisan political attacks. And so that was being raised about what Christy Nome was doing, and I suppose potentially could apply to what you've been reading off these government websites. Um, so it is sort of an interesting First Amendment issue. Other Who brought that up? Was that Joe or
That
William?
was Caleb or William for the Pentagon.
Okay.
I mean,
Just
I
making
brought up the original Pentagon stuff, but yeah.
right, right. Okay. I just want to make sure people get credit for their participation. Anything else in the news? Those are two good things to talk about.
Well, this is very tangential, I must say, but like just in the context of what made me think of it, talking about USDA putting out statements that basically sound like talking points. Um, there's going to be that James Garfield miniseries coming out next week that I'm going to write about, which interests me a lot because the James Garfield assassination in 1880 was prompted primarily by the spoil system, basically the idea that you could get bureaucratic positions by being political allies, which resulted in a large number of reforms. And it's seems to me at least to be an extremely contemporarily relevant story because, well, look around us. That seems to be how the government is functioning now, that everybody gets jobs based on the spoil system. Like even before Trump, it seemed like for quite some time now, um, like cabinet members were always like political allies. There's been increasingly little pretense that any of these people are actually qualified for their jobs. Like we look at the Secretary of Defense, for example, they used to be like a managing type position. You know, like big successful corporate managers would be the ones who would do that job, but like now it's always military people. And you need waivers to even do that because it's not supposed to be a military leader. It's very odd. But like I said, this is highly tangential. Just thinking about the historical nature of the spoil system and how the country looks like today. We're not doing it the same way they were doing it back then, but it certainly seems like we're doing it.
Right. I mean, correct me if I've got this history wrong, but I think after Garfield was assassinated, Chester Arthur became president,
Mm-hmm.
and the civil service system was set up under that
Yeah,
so that spoils people wouldn't be upset and get and shoot the president. Uh,
yeah,
Also, that was like in the midst of all sorts of spoil system abuses that went across parties. Tammany Hall was stood as a symbol of the spoil system. Um, the the spoil system was really found by the way, this is a little bit of an aside. I mentioned this case before, although not by name. In the 80s, Justice Scalia wrote some opinions for the court that basically outlawed the spoils system, particularly as it was functioning in Chicago, and said that, when a new political machine comes in and fires the past patronage workers for their politics, that violates the First Amendment, and you can't do it. Um, I don't think there have been a whole lot of, there were follow-up cases right after that. It seems to be certainly a lot of, I mean, I don't, I think it's safe to say that a lot of President Trump's firings have been based upon the politics of the people he was firing, whether he thought they were partisan Democrats or had been enemies in the past. Um, and so a lot of those have been challenged in court, and there have been sort of like disparate rulings on it. So we'll see how all of those kinds of challenges play out. I think I just saw where Trump had fired all of the members of the Fine Arts Commission because he wants to sort of head off any issues with how he wants to redesign Washington, D.C. with a auditorium on the now demolished east wing of the White House and a sort of like Arch de Triomphe kind of structure, which if I saw the drawing right, and I only just glanced at it, I think he wants to put between on the bridge, but that's between the Pentagon and it crosses straight from the Pentagon to right by the where the cherry trees and the Kennedy Center are. I mean, I could have that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the one he wants to where he wants that. So he fired the entire Fine Arts Commission that had been appointed by, I guess, by Biden. So yeah, there are a lot of issues about that, and a lot of questions about the qualifications of some of the people who have been appointed. This U.S. attorney who was appointed in I think it's the Eastern District of Virginia, to get an indictment real quick against Comey, who had never had any criminal law experience, um, and has run into all sorts of issues about the way she's handling that. Comey has gone to court to say it's a vindictive prosecution, should be thrown out. Trump certainly makes his case easier because since he said in advance of the indictment, and when other U.S. attorneys he had appointed wouldn't bring the indictment, that he wanted the Justice Department to indict him anyway. So Comey's argument about vindictive prosecution, even though it's a high hurdle to get over, Trump is making it a little bit easier. Other thoughts from people other than me? Okay, shall we move on to let's see, I see a couple things in the chat. Oh, I said, thank you, Joe. Oh, you're bringing up this issue of food stamps, and well, this is in connection with the shutdown, the government shutdown. I mean, one of the things that's happening, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, is that be- on November 1st, I think the money for SNAP, the food stamp program, is running out. I think this is partly because of an interpretation that the Trump administration has put on what funds it can use. And it may be using those funds to pay the military, I'm not sure. But that is certainly a big issue that's going to be coming up right in front of us here on November 1st. Okay, back to indecency, pornography, obscenity, and the Communications Decency Act. Um, so just looking at it from 30,000 feet. Um, so indecency is not illegal. Obscenity is an exception to the First Amendment. So obscenity is an area of speech that is not protected by the First Amendment. Um, so, along with fighting words, true threats, conspiracy to commit a crime, etc. Um, Indecency is different than obscenity, uh, and is permissible unless, but may be regulated and punished if it's during the time that children would, if it's a broadcast during the time that children would see it. So that's what the FCC versus Pacifica case is all about. And of course, it involves George Carlin's 730 words monologue. The 730 words, which are repeated over and over in that monologue, are words you can't say on TV when the kids are awake. And a dad driving down the coastal highway in California turned on the radio in the middle of the day with his son in the car. I think it was his kid in the car, and there was George Carlin and his 730 words. Pacifica was sort of I don't know if Pacifica is a going concern. It was a radio network that was sort of leftist and a little more edgy at that time. At any rate, goes to the FCC. FCC issues a penalty, and the Supreme Court takes it up. So, what do you guys think? For those of you who watched the George Carlin monologue, do you think that should be subject to government censure through the FCC for the hours after when the kids are awake?
I mean, maybe it's just because of the environment I grew up in, but it's honestly kind of hard to see why anybody would find it all that offensive, at least in this day and age.
I mean, certainly
Mocking the government itself is more offensive than anything he's actually saying regarding the words.
certainly in my day and age when I was growing up, most parents would have considered it highly offensive. And that's when to be clear, that's when FCC versus Pacifica basically originates. I mean, I don't have the year of the case in front of me, but I think it's 1970s.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
No, I was thinking about because you brought up the minor in the car with his father or whatever. I was gonna kind of try to present the Reno versus ACLU.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that would be, this would be an okay time to do that because
but
it
I'll just
sort of
let you know
shows.
that.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
No, I'm just going over my notes and I'm doing a very poor job of describing the case. So I wrote down some facts about it. And I guess I have more questions about it. So I'll just kind of go through what I have here. So it was Reno versus ACLU in 1997. Supreme Court ruled that the CDA was an unconstitutional restriction on free speech. The CDA's provisions of indecency and offensive material online to minors were too broad and vague violations of the First Amendment. I don't know if I wrote that right.
We're too
The
broad.
internet is
I mean,
entitled.
the broadness and vagueness are two ways to challenge a government regulation under the First Amendment. If a regulation is too broad to be able to figure out who to apply it to, or too vague in laying out what kinds of actions would actually be illegal. Those are two reasons to strike down the government regulation based on the First Amendment. And
So the
CDA that you're referring to,
last thing I had was
Communications Decency Act, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But go ahead.
no, the last thing I wrote down was like it says the internet is entitled to the highest level of the First Amendment. So my question is, I think that I know we would all agree that children shouldn't watch, obscene things or whatnot. So what exactly was being argued? Is it that the First Amendment applies to minors as well, no matter the material, or that I'm trying to understand the case.
Well, so yes, the First Amendment does apply to minors. Um, as sort of as Tinker versus Des Moines said, the First Amendment doesn't stop at the schoolhouse door. I think we talked a little bit about how, yes, even though it applies to minors, it doesn't, minors don't have as broad of First Amendment rights as adults do. We talked a little bit about the school searches in TLO versus New Jersey, the fact that schools can force minors to take drug tests if they're going to be on student council or a school team. Um, and we talked about the Bong Hits case where the Supreme Court was willing to let a school punish a student who was not on campus grounds uh, um, for that message because it involved a drug advocacy, the Supreme Court thought, and the principal thought. So yes, the minors are protected by the First Amendment, but not as much. Um, and but and those like those the level of protection. So this when Justice Stevens in the Reno versus ACLU says that should deserves protection at the highest level of the First Amendment, that he's talking there about strict scrutiny. It has to be narrowly tailored to serve a compelling government interest. Broadcast is not at that level. Uh, the government, through the FCC, can regulate broadcast TV and radio waves, um, and and that's what we have in the FCC versus Pacifica case. That's where a broadcast an FCC broadcast regulation of what was broadcast on the radio. Not everybody, I mean, Justice Thomas, one of the most conservative justices on the court, I think has criticized this distinction, saying that it doesn't make any sense to have less protection for broadcast than for newspapers or the internet, print publication and the internet. And I think possibly there may come a day you might see in the future when the Supreme Court ends up agreeing with that. But the way it is now, there's less First Amendment protection for broadcast, and the FCC can issue regulations. Um, one of the follow-up cases, just as long as we're at Reno versus uh, ACLU, um, it is there's a follow-up case where Fox and other broadcasters uh, were punished by the FCC for what is called what was fleeting nudity or fleeting obscenity. So we're talking there about like Bono at some sort of music award saying getting the award was fucking great. That's a fleeting expletive that resulted in a broadcast organization being fined. There was some fleeting nudity, I think, on some sort of police detective program, Hill Street Blues or something like that, that showed a little boy in a bathroom where a woman we could see the back of a nude woman standing at a sink. And that resulted in a fine. That was fleeting nudity. The Janet Jackson quote unquote wardrobe malfunction also involved an issue of fleeting nudity when her breast was exposed. And the Supreme Court in that case, it's not really a First Amendment case by the time the Supreme Court finishes with it. The Supreme Court says these regulations the FCC promulgated violate the Administrative Procedure Law, APA. In other words, the FCC didn't follow the laws for how you promulgate regulations. So because they hadn't followed the fleeting nudity and fleeting obscenity fines or regulations were not uh, put out under the Administrative Procedure Act. They were void, and those stations could not be forced to pay off the fines. They didn't get to the question of if if the regulations had been put into effect in line with the Administrative Procedure Act, then would the First Amendment have protected the broadcast organizations from having to pay a fine for fleeting nudity and obscenity? I think Justice Thomas suggested in a dissent in that case that he would uh, that he wanted to address the First Amendment issue because he thought that the whole approach of giving less protection to broadcast was outmoded. But in ACLU versus Reno that you just were talking about, Richie, um, Justice Stevens, who gives a he's over the clouds in how great the internet is, the modern the modern soapbox. Of course, Justice Stevens, who's now dead, was writing at a time long before all the perversion of the internet occurred. Well, not all the but before the internet was associated with as much perversion as it is today. Um, but Justice Stevens is saying it's the modern soapbox. It's protected fully by the First Amendment at its highest level. So it has more protection than broadcast news. Everybody clear on that? But back to uh, FCC versus Pacifica. This is so the FCC's action was in finding the Pacifica Broadcasting was upheld. I think it was 5-4. Justice Stevens has, and you need to know this for one of the tests coming up. Justice Stevens has a very strange quote in his opinion where he says, uh, all that we are ruling, and when you read a Supreme Court opinion, you really pay attention when a justice says what the ruling is of the case, because you want to sort of know, what does the court itself say is the ruling of the FCC versus Pacifica? And then he finishes that sentence by saying, all that we're ruling is that we can see a pig in a parlor, and this is a pig in a parlor. Not exactly it reminds one of something that Justice Stewart, who preceded him on the court, Potter Stewart, said about obscenity, and that is he knew it when he saw it. And the Supreme Court justices actually did spend Fridays oftentimes in this period of time. I don't know, maybe they still do, watching obscene movies to determine if they were obscene. Um, Richie, have anything else to say about Reno versus ACLU?
No, I just wanted to get clarification on what they were arguing. I simply wrote down the facts, and I think I had more questions than was able to presented.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, you did. I'm glad you got to that one. That's a good one. Um, okay, let's move from. Does anybody want to say anything about anything? I mean, William was saying no big deal to George Carlin's 730 words. Anybody offended? I mean, I actually thought it was funny, but um, I can certainly see how you know a person could be offended.
I don't think his broad, like if you watch it on YouTube, right? It's
Yeah,
just it's his stand up. But I think if we go to like what is it, FCC versus Pacifica,
yeah,
it occurred during when the dad was driving. It was like they were covering like indecency, basically like a thing on indecency. And so during the beginning of the pride broadcast, they said, "Hey, this is going to be indecent, foul language." They like did all the intros. But then I guess the dad turned it on maybe in the middle and just started hearing cuss words. And so I
Right,
think from a father's perspective, I mean, obviously not offended, you can be easily caught off guard, you know what I mean? You like
right.
turn on the TV and suddenly your kid's in the car and there's like all these words dropping. And I'm not saying you need to protect them. It's just something that like, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
I mean,
But
if I were driving my grandkids, uh, or back in that day, my kids along in a car, and I just turned it on in the middle of that broadcast, I would immediately turn it off. Of course,
yeah, yeah,
that
obviously
was
it's
part of
that.
the argument that Pacifica made is you don't like it, turn it off. If you don't want your kids to hear it, turn it off. But
Yeah,
of
you're not gonna
course,
sit here and listen to it.
it sort of gets out there. I mean, that's the thing. That's sort of the justification for more regulation of broadcast airwaves is that it sort of like comes into your space sometimes in an unwelcome and uninvited way. Although if you turned on the radio, it was invited, but invited not with the expectation you were going to hear those words.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying like, oh, we're offended by it or anything, but I mean it can catch you off guard. You're like, oh, like what's going on? Like it could be like partway through the middle of the monologue, you miss the beginning, and so you kind of get caught and you just change the channel. But there's obviously people want to be angry, like they want to be angry about something, you know what I mean? So,
Right.
but that was part of the argument with FCC versus Pacifica, which is right. Like the Supreme Court ruled that it was not obscene, but it was indecent, and that they had to be aware, like they can't broadcast it during the middle of the day and sort of thing. When I was looking it up, if I remember correctly. So I think they ruled for the FCC.
Say it again.
I think they ruled in favor of the FCC and FCC versus Pacifica that it's indecent but not obscene.
Yeah, indecent but not obscene.
Right? Didn't that come from Stanley versus Georgia, or is that different?
Stanley versus Georgia is different.
Yeah, that's different.
I
Right?
mean, Stanley versus Georgia is in the obscenity area. Guys, just let me just take a real quick. I'm trying to get a magazine out today, and I'm trying to get some photos from the Post Dispatch. I need to send an email to David Carson, who's their Pulitzer Prize winning photographer for all the work he did on Ferguson. And he just emailed me and I need to email him back. Just one quick second. It constantly tells me that multitasking is not my forte. Okay. Probably shouldn't be doing it. Um, so Stanley versus Georgia is this is written by Justice Thurgood Marshall, as I recall. Marshall is famous as the first black justice on the Supreme Court. He's also even more important to his legacy than his Supreme Court days was, which I was fortunate to see the last several years of. I remember well just Justice Marshall having a press conference, in the Supreme Court building, probably attended, since we're talking about what does the press opportunity look like, probably attended by 150 reporters. He walked in with a cane, and just sort of answered a few questions. Um, at any rate, Justice Marshall is the person who I mean, what he's most notable for was the lawyer in Brown versus Board of Education and all sorts of uh, cases that led up to Brown versus Board of Education, ending legally required racial segregation in the South. What was called de jure segregation, by law segregation. Um, in Stanley versus Georgia, I think a person was arrested for having pornography in their house. And basically, the Supreme Court ruling was that in the confines of your house, uh, you have the right to have pornographic magazines. Um, so obscenity is not protected, but I think these were like, I don't know if they were like Playboys or Penthouse or whatever. Those kinds of magazines that are pornographic are protected as long as they don't cross the line in Miller versus California. Does anybody read Miller versus California? Want to tell us the multi-part test in Miller versus California?
I have the test pulled up, but I didn't read Miller versus California.
You want to read us the test? Have you ever pulled up? Because I don't.
Oh, might have to listen to my dogs. All right. Let's see if I don't think I'll be able to at this moment.
Okay, no problem. Anybody else want to talk about Miller?
I'll take it. I'll take the test.
Okay, shoot.
Okay, so to decide if something is obscene, three things must be considered. First, if the average person would find the work as a whole appeals to inappropriate sexual interest. Two, if the work shows sexual conduct in an offensive way as defined by state law. And three, if the work as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value.
Right. So it's gotta meet all of those prongs. By the way, this case, this is a little bit of an aside, but I think an important aside. And this is very relevant to the the school library censorship cases that are percolating around in the federal courts. To what extent can many states, Missouri, Tennessee, Arkansas, Iowa, to name the ones close to where we are, although I'm in Philadelphia today, so it's not close to where I am today. Um, those states have all passed laws saying that any any books in school libraries that have, some sort of sexual content are have to be removed. And I mean, it's caused, I think in Tennessee, definitely hundreds, but maybe thousands. Here, I'm going to put a story I wrote for the Pulitzer Center on this issue in the chat. Just a sec. On the freedom to read. And the way in which Miller gets involved is because they're basically saying um, any kind of let's see, I gotta make sure this chat's going to everybody. Let's see. Everyone, okay. Okay, I just sent that. The reason Miller is relevant is that most of the cases say that just to talk about there being sexual content is too broad because I mean these laws apply it equally to seniors in high school and kindergartners. And, and so that's a little bit broad, to get back to what Richie was talking about broadness sometimes violating the First Amendment. So many of these cases then revolve on, are the books that are being withdrawn or are not added to school libraries, do they violate the Miller test? And I mean, some of the as you'll see in the story I just sent you, some of the books that are withdrawn from school libraries have something like, I mean, have you guys seen that statue of a naked Olympian throwing a discus, which is, not at all sort of, I mean, he's naked, but it's uh, it's not explicit. um, and is a frequently an image that one frequently sees in connection with the Olympics, and is on a number of books that are very popular with young people. Um, so so these court decisions have been saying, well, do these kinds of books that are being withdrawn and do these state statutes, are they overly broad in applying that sexual content? What is sexual content? And it can't be the same for a 12th grader as it is for a kindergartner. So the Miller test comes into play. And particularly that last prong of the test, um, was that you, Tiffany, who was giving it?
Yeah.
Okay. The last prong of the test about, lacking, serious, uh, serious content.
Serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value.
Much better. Thank you for for the specificity. Yeah. Um, so that if it even if there's sexual content, if if it has artistic, literary, uh, or political value, it's protected and it's not obscene and it doesn't fall within that um, exception of the First Amendment. Questions about that? Okay, let's talk about the Communications Decency Act, which Richie got us talking about a little bit. So in 1996, Congress passes the Communications Decency Act. And one thing they're concerned about is oh my gosh, my phone is trying to give me an answer. I have to give it credit. I mean, my watch. So, so the Communications Decency Act was a part of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And this was a time when the internet was pretty young. There was already a lot of obscenity a lot of pornography on it. Um, and Congress was concerned about two things, trying to make it possible for internet service providers to remove the pornography without subjecting themselves to some sort of a suit. And secondly, they didn't want to set up rules that restrained the spontaneous exchange of ideas that the internet provided. I mean, we began talking about postings in the thousands, in the hundreds and thousands and 10,000s, and then millions when you were talking about internet service providers like uh, Craigslist or MySpace, or then now in the days of TikTok and etc. So, I mean, there's no way in which an internet service provider can review all of the postings that are submitted to them before showing them without hiring a huge staff and a big delay in the postings. And so Congress wanted to encourage the growth of the internet in the United States, and not discourage it. So they created this safe harbor that's basically said internet service providers, I think the term they use is interactive computer services, um, cannot be sued for the content of a third party posting. Um, and and that is the law today. It's it's pretty controversial. Congress often talks about limiting it. Um, it gives internet service providers have editorial prerogative to refuse to publish postings, but they don't have to exercise that prerogative. And so really for a lot of uh, a lot of social media, the easiest thing to do is just sort of to say anything goes. Um, there's, lots of controversy developed over internet service providers beginning to remove hate speech, anti-black, anti-female, misogynist speech, then false information about COVID and about vaccinations, false information um, about the 2020 presidential election, Trump's claim that it had been stolen by the Democrats. All these things got removed, and it certainly is extraordinary to take down the social media posts of the president. Of course, the president was in the midst of trying to overturn an election. So it was an extraordinary time. I have in the link sort of the social media defense of why they did that. They have now, if you've noticed now that Trump is back in and powerful, YouTube, Google, which is Google, has rescinded that, and he's back to being approved for their platform, um, and for most, and I think for most, I don't know, maybe all other platforms. And there's uh, much less social media platform uh, um, editing of some of these false, hateful postings. Um, It's a little bit ironic, and the Supreme Court just ruled this past when the Gateway Pundit and Missouri Attorney General sued all these social media companies and said that their removal of these posts was the biggest violation of the First Amendment in history. The U.S. Supreme Court said, I think by a 7-2 vote, that that was ridiculous. Well, they didn't say that was ridiculous. They said that that wasn't true, that the social media companies had uh, the social media companies had the uh, First Amendment prerogative to edit uh, their platforms to eliminate dangerously false information about COVID, vaccines, the presidential election, as long as they didn't violate the First Amendment because they were not the government. If the government were to coerce them into taking those down, that would be a different matter. I mean, there were some claims that some of the social media companies felt like they could face legal consequences if they didn't take down uh, some of these posts after being contacted by the Biden administration. Uh, but the Supreme Court said that it's only in the instance where there's actual coercion proven that the social media company has to take that the social media company that there would be a violation of the First Amendment. I guess the government in collusion with the social media company. Any questions about that?
My question is, how does that protect them with like algorithmic like promotion now, right? Before it was they weren't held liable for publishing, but now they design algorithms to directly push content.
Well, that's a super good question, and I do not have a clue. I mean, there must be there must be court cases about that. Um, I'll do a little bit of diving into that, and um, if you're game and can find some stuff and bring it to class, that would be awesome. Because you can, I mean, I assume what you're saying, Joe, is that you could just design an algorithm to uh, cut out the people you didn't want, or the government didn't want to be heard. Yes.
Yeah, essentially, right? Because instead of just it being like free and open exchange, it's now designed, dictated, and certain content's pushed based off engagement, that sort of thing.
Right, right. Um, yeah, I'm just trying to real quick get some more comments noted here in the grades. Um, by the way, I warn you, we're going to end somewhere around, uh, I guess be 11:20 your time because I got to get to the airport. Um, let's see here, Joe. Okay. Other questions? That's a really good one.
I mean, I kind of do just want to hear what you think about something, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, we can't penalize the social media companies because they're not state actors. But, okay, so I looked up the definition of the state action doctrine. A judicially created doctrine under which, due to the extent of the government's exercise of authority over an activity, private entities that participate in the activity may be deemed to be acting with the authority of the government and thus subject to the constitutional limits applicable to the government. And then I was just thinking about how Zuckerberg and, the Elon Musk and like all the billionaires and stuff are invited to the White House stuff and all that. Like, how close do you think that they need to be to constitute state actors?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, the court case I was telling you about where the Supreme Court said that there wasn't government coercion. That involved allegations that the Biden administration is putting a lot of pressure on some of these social media companies, and I think in some cases they were doing a lot of jawboning, whether it was amounting to coercion or not, I don't know. But now, sort of the shoe is on the other foot. Just like we were saying a couple weeks ago that uh, cancel culture had sort of shifted to the other side of the spectrum. Now the shoe's on the other foot, and all of these, Elon Musk, Sam Altman of ChatGPT, the Facebook executives, the Google executives, they're all trying to kiss up to Donald Trump, at least in my perception of things, and it sounds like maybe yours. And and they have, it's partly in connection with that they've stopped taking down some of the conservative speech in the president's speech, even where it's sort of like clearly false. Um, do I think the social media that I guess I don't think that there would be any proof that Trump had coerced them if they're just sort of like looking out for what they think is their best future interest and they're cozying up to the president of the United States. I mean, that's something that they can do. And um you know, I do think it gets different when you've got the head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, saying, if the broadcast stations don't take down Jimmy Kimball, we're going to have to take a look at that. I mean, that's more coercive than all these executives looking to their bottom line and saying, um, we think it's in our corporate best interest to change our moderation policy and allow more of this anti-vaccine, anti-COVID, and pro-Trump conversation onto our platforms. Um, I don't think that's government coercion. That's sort of like the decision of those executives. I mean, it's disturbing, but I don't think we're into a First Amendment violation. You know what, guys? I'm going to cut it off there today because I saw my Uber just arrived out in front of the house a little bit early. So what we'll do is next time we will take up some of those cases that are in the Communications Decency Act, reading that a piece that I wrote, Ziran, roommates, Barnes, and then we'll move on to the to copyright. So I'll send you a message that lays all this out, but we'll uh, finish up on Communications Decency Act with those cases and move on to the copyright so that then we'll be in position the week after that to review, and you can take the second test before Thanksgiving. Any questions? Okay, great. Good discussion, guys. Thanks. Bye.